If the executives of three competing airlines sat in a room together and agreed to cancel flights until ticket prices stopped falling, they would be arrested. The Department of Justice would call it a cartel. Lawyers would spend years in court. People would go to prison. In the container shipping industry, this happens openly. Companies file the details with a regulator, receive confirmation that it is legal, and proceed. The practice has a name. It is called a blank sailing, and it is one of the most consequential economic arrangements most consumers have never heard of. The container shipping industry operates under an explicit exemption from antitrust law that has existed in the United States since 1916. Under this exemption, competing ocean carriers are permitted to share vessels, coordinate sailing schedules, agree on which ports to call, and collectively withdraw capacity from the market by canceling sailings when rates fall below levels they find acceptable. In virtually every other sector of the global economy, this would be illegal price fixing. In ocean shipping, it is standard industry practice. To understand why this exemption exists, you have to go back to the original problem it was designed to solve. In the 1870s, British steamship lines operating on the India trade route began colluding on freight rates. They called the arrangement a conference. The logic was straightforward. A steamship route requires enormous capital investment in vessels. The revenue from that investment arrives voyage by voyage, subject to whatever demand exists at the time of sailing. In a fully competitive market, a new entrant can always undercut existing operators temporarily, destroy the economics of the route for everyone, and then exit before bearing the full consequences. The conference system was designed to prevent this by stabilizing rates enough to justify continued capital investment. The argument carried when the United States codified shipping conferences into law in 1916 and reaffirmed them in the Shipping Act of 1984. The maritime industry is considered too capital-intensive and too structurally volatile to function under the same competitive rules as, say, the trucking industry. A shipping company cannot idle a $200 million vessel the way a trucking company can park a truck. The argument for special treatment was built on the specific economics of ships. That argument is not entirely without merit. The problem is what the industry has built on top of it. Today, the global container shipping market is organized into three major alliances. The Gemini Cooperation links Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd. The Premier Alliance connects Ocean Network Express, HMM, and Yang Ming. The Ocean Alliance brings together CMA, CGM, COSCO, Evergreen, and OOCL. These alliances collectively control roughly 85% of global container shipping capacity. Within each alliance, member carriers share vessel space, coordinate which ships, sail which routes, and make collective decisions about schedule deployment. They operate under vessel sharing agreements and slot exchange arrangements that are disclosed to and reviewed by the Federal Maritime Commission in the United States and equivalent regulators in other jurisdictions. The alliances do not technically agree on rates. Rate setting is still supposed to be competitive. What they do instead is control supply. The mechanism is straightforward. When cargo demand is soft and rates are falling, an alliance collectively decides to blank sailings on a given trade lane. A blank sailing means a scheduled voyage simply does not happen. The ship either waits, is redeployed elsewhere, or is slowed down on a different route to absorb the excess capacity time. By withdrawing supply, the alliance arrests the rate decline and stabilizes prices at a level its members find acceptable. The formal term regulators use is capacity management. The functional description is that a group of companies controlling 85% of a market are coordinating to limit what they sell until prices recover. The pandemic years made the mechanism visible in a way it had never been before. In early 2020, as global trade collapsed during the first wave of lockdowns, carriers blanketed their schedules with cancellations. Within months, rates began stabilizing. Then, consumer demand recovered faster than expected as stimulus payments drove an unprecedented surge in goods consumption. Demand exploded, but carriers had already optimized their networks for the lower volume. Capacity was tight, ports were congested, ships were backed up at anchor. Between 2020 and 2022, the average rate to ship a 40-foot container from Shanghai to Los Angeles went from roughly $1,500 to over $13,500. The Federal Maritime Commission later estimated that major container carriers collected more than $150 billion in freight rate premiums above pre-pandemic levels during this period. Congressional hearings followed. Retailers, manufacturers, and trade groups testified that carriers were refusing cargo, ignoring existing contracts, and charging emergency surcharges layered on top of already elevated rates. The response from carriers was consistent. The price is the price the market sets. The price the market was setting was being set by a market in which 85% of capacity was coordinated by 3 alliances operating under a legal exemption that prohibited competition authorities from intervening. The result was the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 2022. The law increased Federal Maritime Commission oversight, required carriers to justify blank sailing decisions, and created new mechanisms for shippers to challenge unreasonable practices. It did not touch the antitrust exemption. The core arrangement remained intact. The reason the exemption survives every political cycle that produces anger about it comes down to an inconvenient economic reality that opponents of the exemption rarely engage with directly. Container shipping is structurally prone to boom and bust cycles that destroy capital. Between 2009 and 2016, the shipping industry collectively lost tens of billions of dollars as carriers that had ordered heavily during the pre-crisis growth period sailed into a decade of overcapacity. Multiple major carriers went bankrupt or merged under duress. Hanjin Shipping, which was at the time the world's 7th largest container line, collapsed in 2016 with ships stranded at ports around the world, cargo abandoned, and shippers left holding contracts worth nothing. The argument that some mechanism for capacity coordination prevents worse disruption than a pure price war is not made up. The 2009 to 2016 period, when the conference exemption was in force but alliances were less consolidated than today, produced exactly the destruction the original conference system was designed to prevent. The counter-argument is equally direct. Whatever protection the system provides to capital investment in shipping infrastructure, it is paid for in full by the businesses and consumers who depend on ocean freight. When alliances blank sailings to hold rates, every retailer, manufacturer, and logistics buyer in the world is paying a premium set by a coordinated cartel. The transfer from cargo owners to ship owners is real, measurable, and ongoing. The current structure is under more pressure than at any point in the last 2 decades. MSC, now the world's largest container line, chose to dissolve its decade-long 2M alliance with Maersk in 2025 rather than continue sharing capacity. MSC is large enough to operate as its own effectively independent capacity block. When a single carrier commands enough tonnage to set rates on major trade lanes without coordination, the alliance structure loses some of its relevance. The US government's 2025 executive actions targeting Chinese-operated vessels and Chinese-built ships added a new layer of complexity. COSCO, which is state-owned by the Chinese government and is a member of the Ocean Alliance alongside CMA, CGM, French-controlled, and Evergreen, Taiwanese, sits inside an alliance structure that now intersects with active geopolitical tension between its member carriers' home countries. Whether the antitrust exemption survives the next decade in its current form is genuinely uncertain. The political pressure in the United States and the European Union to revisit it has never been higher. The shipping industry's argument that it needs special rules to function will be tested against a post-pandemic record that includes the largest profit extraction from captive customers in its history. The next time you see the price of something you imported online, a piece of electronics, a piece of furniture, a kitchen appliance, some fraction of what you paid covered the cost of a sailing that was deliberately not made so that the price of the sailing that did happen would be higher. The shipping industry operates a legal cartel. Most of the world does not know it exists. The consumers who pay for it have no practical alternative. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.